Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and tonight we are talking about the newly passed Medicaid expansion here in Virginia. This is going to be doing a look at the fine print of what has actually passed, and joining me to help sort through that is Delegate Patrick Hope from District 47. Thank you so much for being here, Patrick.
Thank you, Catherine. It's good to be here.
So your district is mostly in Arlington.
Right. You
have been in the House of Delegates since 2010. And explain a little bit about how far back this struggle goes to actually get Medicaid expansion in Virginia, and what does Medicaid expansion mean?
Yeah, no, it's a significant achievement, and for a lot of people that are going to benefit from it. I was elected in 2009, and in 2010, that was when the Affordable Care Act became law. And so just so you understand how Medicaid works in Virginia, under current law, before this new law goes into effect, Medicaid has been very, I call it stingy, very frugal in terms of eligibility. 30% of federal poverty are those people that are eligible for Medicaid under current law. What this does with the Affordable Care Act is expanding Medicaid up to 138% of federal poverty. So at 30%, we're talking about an individual who maybe makes about $3,000 a year to be eligible. When you raise it up to 138%, that's $12,000 for an individual, $24,000 for a family of four. And so the people that are in that gap, for them, about 300 to 350,000 people are going to be impacted by this new law.
Right, and up to this point, so you had the very poorest people got coverage through Medicaid. People who made over $24,000 a year could get it on the exchange. So people were eligible for Obamacare, and some people got subsidies. Right. But the people in this gap, there was no coverage for them.
That's exactly right. So they make too much to qualify for Medicaid, but not enough money to be able to purchase it on the marketplace or the exchange like you and I do. And so that's why this is so important to them. Imagine going to sleep at night and wondering if your spouse is going to be sick, and wondering how you're going to pay for it. If you have a child, if they break their leg playing sports, how are you going to pay for that? And so this is a big peace of mind for a lot of families out there. And it's not trivial, even up here in Northern Virginia. About 60,000 families, 60,000 people in Northern Virginia will now have health insurance starting January the 1st because of this new Medicaid expansion.
And you make a good point. So normally when legislation from a session is signed into law, it becomes effective July 1. That's right. Not happening here. It's going to be January, and it's not going to be instant or immediate. There was a lot of debate in the Senate before this was passed about some of the processes that have to be implemented.
Yeah, no, it does take some time because we need to make sure that we know who's eligible. They have to apply and be qualified, and that's going to take some time to get people. So even when we flip the switch January the 1st, we're not going to suddenly have 300,000 to 400,000 people suddenly go into the hospitals and things like that. There needs to be a process in which they're eligible. And so we have a number of months to work with the Trump administration to get waivers, to make sure that they approve our different programs to expand Medicaid. And there's also a separate track where we have a work requirement, and that is something that requires a waiver from the Trump administration to grant that as well. So there's quite a few things that we need to get in line before January 1st.
There was a lot of debate over the work requirement. Yeah. Obviously, when that was put out there by the Trump administration, there were some states that jumped right on it. Kentucky was one of them. But I've heard some interviews saying that basically most people are working who qualify for Medicaid expansion. You have disabled people, you have elderly people, you have people under 18. All of them are exempted anyway from a work requirement.
That's right. And if you just look at who's in the federal poverty line up to 138%, that's $24,000 for a family of four. So $24,000 is income coming in. As we said earlier, it's not enough to buy insurance on the open market, but it is income coming in. So most of these families will be eligible. But the work requirements are really important. I'm not sure we could have gotten Medicaid expansion through the General Assembly without it. So it's a really important detail, but it's also important to know that it's not going to swallow up the entire group. There could be 10 to 20,000, we don't exactly know how many, are not going to be eligible or be disqualified because of the work requirement. But the narrative that it struck, the tone that it struck for most people to get them to yes, and that's what we needed to get the majority, was that people should not be given this government program unless if they're able-bodied and not working. And so we accomplished that goal through this.
And I listened to the debate, and it was an interesting debate because there was an interesting editorial in the Roanoke Times this weekend about how this was resistance from Republicans in Virginia, rural Republicans, but ultimately what put this over the finish line were also rural Republicans. And so when you look at how the Commonwealth is a very big place, it varies dramatically from where we are in Northern Virginia to Roanoke or Danville or Martinsville. And the fact of the matter is, not having enough jobs or not having jobs that pay a living wage is also part of this equation. Having people healthy enough to work, because you've got chronic illnesses like diabetes and high blood pressure that's not being treated. You've got the opioid epidemic on top of everything else. You have a lack of funds for mental health. And then you've got people living in areas where really there aren't jobs that pay a living wage.
Yeah. Well, to be sure, Catherine, everyone is going to benefit from this. So whether you're in Northern Virginia, you're in Roanoke, you're in Tidewater, wherever you are in small town Virginia, you're going to benefit from this. Not just from the people who, if you think about the people out in Wise County every year for the remote access to care, right, where they line up for days just to get health care. I mean, those people are going to benefit too. In Northern Virginia, we're going to benefit. In my neck of the woods in Arlington, 7,000 people are going to benefit. This will benefit every corner of the Commonwealth, not just for those who are covered, but this is going to be a big job creator. It's estimated about 26,000 new jobs will be created over the next 5 years because of Medicaid expansion. The new dollars that come in for health care is going to require more administrators, more doctors, more nurse practitioners. All those things that make a health system run will be flowing into our economy. And so it's good for the people who are getting health insurance. It's good for those families for that peace of mind, but it also is a big boon for our economy.
So let's just backpedal a tiny bit and talk about the money and where it comes from, because this was also part of this struggle to pass Medicaid expansion. So Virginia taxpayers were paying federal tax dollars into a fund that was then going back out to states that had expanded Medicaid.
That's right. So since 2014, $2 billion a year leaves Virginia and goes to the federal government. And it's supposed to, for states that accept Medicaid, that money is supposed to be returned. But we have been denying it for the last 6 years, and so we haven't been able to get that money back. Now, thank goodness that we're smart enough to bring that money back into Virginia, and that money is going to be flowing into helping provide the health insurance to people.
Yeah, I just wanted people to understand where the money's coming from. We paid in, now we're getting it back, and it's our money, and those dollars are now flowing to expand medical services.
That's right.
So let's imagine 300,000 people, and they won't all get it at once,
right,
but you've got to find medical homes for 3,000 people.
That's right.
So that does create more jobs, and it allows medical practices to expand. Let's talk a little bit about the tangential benefit of certification programs in our community colleges too, because a lot of health tech jobs are now going through our community colleges. We have 23 to provide that workforce.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point, and not just the community colleges, the people in the training levels, but also in the schools, medical schools as well too. All those jobs are going to be very good paying jobs for a lot of families.
Yeah, I mean, I was just at the Rotary Club of Fairfax today, and they gave scholarships out to students from Fairfax High School, and 3 of these students are getting nursing degrees. Yeah. 3, right? I thought, that's amazing that these 3 people are like, yes, I'm going into nursing, starting at the community college and then transferring to George Mason's nursing program.
Yeah. And that's a big part of the implementation of the Affordable Care Act. We need to make sure that we have providers. So we've addressed the issue with coverage. And so everyone has an insurance card who's eligible, but we need to make sure they also have access to care. And so that means when you pick up the phone, you want to have access to a physician or a nurse. And so that's why those programs to really start that pipeline going to make sure that we have adequate providers out there. And that's the implementation phase. This is really, as hard as it was to push this rock up the hill, we now need to focus on the implementation, and we got to get this one right too.
Right, and so, you're right, in more populous areas, you've got more demand. Yeah. In rural areas, it's a little bit different. The struggle might be, we just had a piece of legislation passed this year also about nurse practitioners, which I think was kind of monumental in trying to deliver healthcare services in more places through qualified nurse practitioners as well. Right. So I see all of these pieces fitting together in a very positive sort of way for the future of healthcare in Virginia.
No, we're really shaping up our infrastructure, and this is a big part of that.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, now that we have Medicaid expansion, that there are people that are going to be covered, like children in foster care who age out. I think they're one of the groups that are going to be covered until the age of 26.
That's right.
Right. So who are some of the other groups that, off the top of your head, will also benefit from this expanded care?
Well, I mean, I think we're going to cover a lot of people for mental health services and substance abuse services. As you know, our opioid crisis is at an all-time high. It's one of the worst in the areas. And so it's something that's going to be, people are going to be eligible for. So you think of people that haven't been able to get the care. Maybe they have a lot of pent-up different demands, but because of cost, they haven't been able to afford it. And you think about all the different chronic diseases out there, heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, asthma, those types of things are all piling up, and so those people and those families will now become eligible, and so they're likely to get the care that they need, mental health and also substance abuse services as well.
And you were talking a bit too about the fact that we've got to incentivize providers so that more providers will take Medicaid patients, because this is another hurdle that requires incentives, right?
Yeah. Well, included in the Medicaid budget, we put some resources in there for hospitals for inpatient and outpatient care to pay them at a higher rate. And that was fully paid for by the hospitals themselves. And we can talk about the assessment that pays for all that. But we didn't do anything for physicians. And so it's really important that we go back in the future and make sure that physicians are compensated as well. If anyone is in the Medicaid program right now, they know how hard it is to find a provider that accepts Medicaid. And so that problem is not going to change overnight. So we need to make sure that we raise those reimbursement rates, because currently it's around 68 cents on the dollar. So you're losing money every time you take a patient. So that's why a lot of physicians will cap the number of Medicaid patients. But if we raise that reimbursement rate, they're likely to take more Medicaid patients, and that's what we need right now.
No, absolutely, that's what we need right now. Because, having this on the books and then getting through the implementation phase so that, and getting the word out too, right? Isn't part of the struggle. Like, I sort of feel like we're insider baseball, like we know what Medicaid expansion is, but for the 300,000 people who are suddenly have gotten something, it's going to be a messaging issue.
Yeah, I don't think it's much different than what we did with the marketplace. Remember, we're trying to get people for Obamacare to register for those that are eligible for the marketplace. We're going to have to create some sort of similar type incentive to make sure we get the word out.
Well, and that's what we're going to talk about when we come back after this break. We are talking with Delegate Patrick Hope from Arlington about the recent passage of Medicaid expansion here in Virginia and what that is going to mean for the approximately 300,000 people who will suddenly have access to health care all across the Commonwealth. Join us after this break.
You know what, guys? There's a lot of tree branches and dry brush over here. We should probably move the bonfire over there.
I'm guessing Smokey liked that idea.
Hey, Hard, what's this?
That's my resignation. You're resigning.
Why? You've been putting me under a lot of pressure lately. That's why I'm ready to quit.
Oh, I forgot. I'll do better. Please don't quit on me.
Don't let your heart quit on you. Get your uncontrolled high blood pressure to a healthy range before it's too late.
So you can't save money? That's easy as pie. Brown bagging lunch instead of going out. $6 save times 5 days a week times 10 years is $21,000. That's a lot of lettuce. Small changes today, big bucks tomorrow. Feedthepig.org.
Did you know kids who play outdoors have healthier lungs?
Totally.
I did. Did you know that boys that play with dolls make better husbands?
My son has lots of dolls. But did you know terry cloth diapers breathe better?
I did.
It's totally true.
Oh, yeah.
Did you know that strollers have the right of way on the sidewalk?
Yes.
Yep, I did. Did you guys
Did you know that kids who eat breakfast have higher GPAs?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. That's actually what I was going to say.
Did you know babies should never touch silver? It's really bad for them.
I knew that.
Did you guys know that statistically friendly kids have more friends?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's obvious.
Did you know most people think they're using the right car seat for their kid, but they're not?
Parents who really know it all know for sure that their child is in the right seat at the right age and size. Visit safercar.gov/the right seat to make sure your child is protected.
I'm putting that on my blog.
I just put it in mine.
we're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. Tonight we are talking about Medicaid expansion, which has passed here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, with Delegate Patrick Hope. Thank you so much for being here, Delegate Hope.
Thank you very much.
So let's talk a little bit about mental health services. I mean, that is something that our Commonwealth has struggled with for years. You used the word stingy about, some of our Medicaid benefits, but we have struggled over the years to try to provide enough resources to fund systems and better services for those who struggle with mental illness.
Yeah, I think that over the years we've seen the gaps, and they've been in difficult situations where we've seen them. And so you think about the Virginia Tech tragedy, where we all got together and tried to figure out what's a way to make sure this tragedy doesn't happen again. And then you have the tragedy with Senator Creed Deeds and his son that tragically committed suicide because we couldn't find a bed. And so now we've created a system now where we're trying to look at our entire mental health program, our entire delivery program. Are we doing it the right way? Do we have enough funding in place? And of course, all the answers to that is no. We need to fill these gaps and strengthen up the safety net. And that's the beauty of the Medicaid expansion program, because it frees up a lot of new money for us to plow some investments into things like mental health and substance abuse. And we've laid the framework, and in fact, through the Deeds Commission, it's called the Joint Commission on 21st Century Mental Health Services. I'm a member of the commission, and we're looking at this holistically in a comprehensive way to identify the gaps and start working towards filling in those gaps with those resources. And the Medicaid expansion budget that we just passed will free up a lot of money to plow in about almost $200 million into our safety net.
Wow, that sounds like a lot more money
It is.
than I recall ever being put toward this.
It's historic. Now, it also includes, I should tell you, it also includes intellectual disabilities and Medicaid waivers. And I think over the years, your listeners have been aware of the waiting list that we have for people with intellectual disabilities to get services. But most of that money, most of that $200 million is going towards mental health. And thanks to the work that we've done at the Commission, identifying those gaps, given things like same-day services. So you go into the CSB or you go into a jail, we want to make sure those are same-day services, that if you're identified as someone with a serious mental illness, that you get treated right away. We also try to connect people to primary care services. So generally people that have a mental health issue, they also might have a chronic disease, maybe they have diabetes or heart disease, and so they can connected that way too. So there's a lot of things that this Medicaid expansion does that goes beyond just providing coverage to people. It actually lines up the services as well.
There's so many things that are interconnected. We've had Dr. Bassam Khan on the show before. He is the Executive Director of Neighborhood Health. And one of the things in talking about, it's a federally qualified health clinic, but one of the things that floored me is they screen every single patient they see for depression. Everybody. And I'm thinking, that makes so much sense, right? Because that's one way of picking up, to your point, sometimes you're depressed and it impacts your health, and sometimes your chronic health issues create depression.
Yeah.
But not every general practitioner or health provider is necessarily looking at the fact that we need to treat the brain as another organ of the body that needs our attention.
That's exactly right. No, I mean, I look at mental health issues just like physical health issues. It's not an option to treat someone's mental illness. It's the right thing to do to provide them that care. And so I like the way we're setting up this new system here for Virginia's healthcare system, because we're treating the whole patient. And we're trying to identify medical homes for everybody. And so you do what's the high quality, the better patient outcomes. And so when it comes to mental health, that part is now included, and I think that's good to see.
It's interesting you talk about health outcomes, because it seems to me that the whole underlying foundation of the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, which is one and the same, was the quality of outcomes versus reimbursement simply paid on number of visits. How's that going? I mean, it seems to fundamentally make sense, but how do you measure whether that's actually working?
I think it's been hard for them to figure out how they can do that, and I think they're struggling at the Medicare level to do that. And so you fundamentally and logically, it does make sense that we don't want to just pay people for visits.
Right.
We want to make sure that they have better patient outcomes. But there can be a number of things that affect that. It could be people's living environments, their culture. You know, someone, when I used to work for cardiology many years ago, cardiologist once told me after someone has open heart surgery, trying to teach them not to go home and eat fried chicken is a really important thing. And so they've got to have that patient adherence. They have to take their medications. That's another good example. So there's a lot of different factors that may contribute to poor outcomes, but we need to incentivize patients, and that's what's so good about this new Medicaid expansion law, is we do include incentives for patients to stay healthy. Incentives for someone with diabetes to go get their feet checked or their blood pressure checked. Incentives for people with asthma to make sure they're taking their medicines and adhering to their medications, getting their scripts filled. So there's a lot of different things that we can do that we know will improve healthy outcomes, and we can incentivize those healthy behaviors by lowering premiums and copays, and that's a good incentive to do that.
Yeah, one of the terms he introduced was social determinants of health.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, I mean, I think the data shows that what your zip code is, you know, impacts how long you'll live and what kind of healthy outcomes you can expect. And a lot of that is the quality of drinking water, or it's access to healthy foods. People live with our food deserts, right? And so, and Virginia struggles with all of that, just like Flint, Michigan. Our problems are different from place to place, but there is such a thing as social determinants of health, and I think that's going to factor into the outcomes, what we're able to do with Medicaid expansion. And what about technology too? I mean, there's, you know, we talked a little bit about electronic health records earlier, but people wear devices. Like, you know how many steps, you know what your resting heartbeat is. You know, do you foresee a time where there will be money put toward figuring out how to use technology better in healthcare? I mean,
yeah, I think there will be, and I think all that information is out there, and that can help determine what your premium and your copay is going to be. And I think there's some efforts to look at ways to incentivize people to do that. So I think, you know, we've already have a lot of health insurance plans that will charge you a lower rate if you're not a smoker, or you commit to quit smoking. And so those types of incentives, and you know, all these bands are connected.
Wearables, right?
Yeah, they know how many steps that you walk.
Right.
You can't lie about it.
I want a discount, right? I want 10,000 steps a day. We should all get a discount.
That's right. So, but I think that all those things can come together with this big data, and can understand how we're doing as a society. And you can gauge someone's premium based on how healthy they're eating, and whether they're moving around, whether they're exercising, whether they're taking their medications. There's all kinds of things that you can incentivize people to get them to be healthier and live longer and be less sick.
So let's talk a little bit about how these intersecting things like mental health and the criminal justice system. You know, here we are fortunate here in Fairfax County that we have the Diversion First program. Yeah. You know, Sheriff Stacey Kincaid brought that from Texas up here. It's been quite successful in keeping mentally ill people out of jail and from engaging in with terrible outcomes with law enforcement. You know, how do you see a greater awareness or funds for mental health creeping into things like how law enforcement deals with those who are mentally ill?
Yeah, no, it's something that the Deeds Commission is looking very closely at. And so the idea here is to divert people from jail. And when you have a serious mental illness, the last place you need to be is jail. And generally people are being picked up for these misdemeanors like failure to ID, trespassing, or drunk in public. And a lot of times what they're doing in different jurisdictions, they're having these drop-off centers that the community services boards have set up. And so law enforcement can pick them up and take them to the drop-off center to get treatment rather than take them to jail. Because when they take them to jail, I mean, the police officers tell me they have to go through booking and all that stuff, and it takes a long time, and they're off. They can't be on the street. But they can take them as an alternative to the drop-off center, which is the most appropriate place to put the individual anyway, and they can go back out onto the street.
Yeah, we have a crisis resource center not that far from this studio, and that's exactly what they're trying to do, is taking people there to be triaged. Where do they really need to go? To the hospital? Do they need a bed? You know, do they need to be in jail? But triaging them somewhere else.
Right.
But again, we're fortunate. I think Fairfax County has resources. We had somebody who took a leadership role in that. But we have a lot of county sheriff's departments running jails around the state.
No, that's exactly right. And it's not that way throughout the state. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to do, is put these resources in there to divert people in a place where they don't need to be. I mean, you've heard the most famous case, I think, recently is J. Michael Mitchell out in Hampton Roads, who was arrested for stealing $5 worth of convenience store things. And he was put in jail for over 100 days, stopped eating, was losing a tremendous amount of weight, and died. Now, that J. Michael, for stealing $5, should not have been in jail.
Right.
First of all, for that misdemeanor. But because he was seriously mentally ill, he was identified as such, but he didn't get the treatment that he needed. And so he shouldn't have been in jail that long. And so one of the things that I'm working on that I think is some disagreement within law enforcement is that in a situation like that, does law enforcement have the discretion to take someone like J. Michael instead of jail to one of those drop-off centers, one of these crisis intervention centers? And law enforcement tell me that they have a difference of opinion. In fact, if there is someone there asking you to press charges, and in J. Michael's case, the convenience store clerk asked that charges be pressed on J. Michael Mitchell, they don't feel like they have the discretion but to take that individual to jail. What I'd like to do is change the law and make sure that that law enforcement officer, in J. Michael Mitchell's case, for stealing only $5 worth of food, has that ability to take him to a crisis intervention center. And we could have avoided that tragedy.
So is that something that we can look for next session? I mean, I know this is how legislators think, is in terms of bills.
Well, we do, generally speaking, but this is a big deal. And so the question then becomes, for what crimes do you give that discretion? And so it's not as simple as saying that, okay, for stealing only $5 worth of candy, that's something that it can easily go to the crisis intervention center. But what if I push you? What if I spit on you? What if I do something that is still a misdemeanor, but it's because of my mental illness? That's why the charge was. It's easier to say if I commit a felony, then you take someone to jail and they have to be booked on charges. But otherwise, you have to think through what are the crimes, what the misdemeanors, what various degrees of misdemeanors are going to be eligible. And so that's something that we have before the Deeds Commission to take a look at.
So that's one of the things that I want to delve into a little bit too, is the committees that you sit on, because we'll talk in the next segment more about how the committee structure works. But what committees do you sit on currently?
I'm on General Laws, which doesn't have a whole lot of impact on what we're talking about, but I'm on the Courts of Justice Committee, which does, and I'm also on the Health, Welfare, and Institutions Committee, which does. And then when we're at a session, I'm on the Deeds Commission, as I mentioned, and I'm also on the Joint Commission on Healthcare.
See, and to me, that's because all the heavy lifting is done in those committees. That's what makes the difference. And so when we come back from this break, we are going to be drilling down a little bit more with Delegate Patrick Hope on how these ideas, these bills, these concepts work their way through the committee system and then are taken from there to floor votes, because I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand how our legislative system works here in Virginia. And that's very critical to try to understand what is feasible and what can be done and what's going to be a little harder to do. So we're going to be doing a little bit of Civics 101 when we come back from this break. So please join us.
Art, a universal language, an expression of culture, of self. And now, thanks to Empowered Women International, a way for emerging and established immigrant and refugee artists and artisans to find hope to earn a living while enriching the lives of all of us. Empowered Women International, making a better America every day. For more information on Empowered Women International's educational programs, or to make a tax-free donation, contact cfrip@aol.com.
Here, kitty, kitty. Here, kitty, kitty, kitty. Here, kitty, kitty.
You'd think it would be easy to tell which kids have trouble with their eyesight. But that's not always the case. Even though 1 in 4 children may have a vision problem, eye doctors tell us the symptoms aren't always so obvious. We do know that 80% of all childhood learning is visual. And without good vision, kids can have trouble learning to read and may fall behind in school. For clues on how to spot the real-life signs of childhood vision problems and what parents can do, visit checkyearly.com. A public service message from the Vision Council of America, and reading is fundamental.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. We are talking about the newly passed Medicaid expansion here in Virginia with Delegate Patrick Hope. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
So when we went to our break, we were talking about committees and committee structures, which committees you sit on. Explain a little bit to people about how assignments are made in committees, how that changed this year, and what we can expect to see next year when we go into session.
Okay, well, this is my 9th session in office, and up to this year, the Speaker of the House, and the only Speaker that I knew before this year was Speaker Bill Howe out of Fredericksburg, South Stafford County. He chose your committee assignments. Now, you can always have input, and thankfully the Speaker always gave me the committee assignments that I asked for, so I had really good committee assignments. I was very pleased. This year, with the power of 49, and really but for David Yancey's name being pulled out of a bowl, it would have been 50-50, and I think everyone did recognize that going in. The Speaker contacted us very early on to say that, you know, there's going to be some give and take, and, you know, we talked about what those the different ratios would be, and proportional to as close to 49 to 51 as it possibly could be. It ended up being a 2-vote spread between the two, but we did have more input than we had in years past, and so I think that pleased a lot of people. We try to get our freshmen on some relevant committees so that they can use their expertise, but also have an impact in different areas as well. And so that was a little bit different process this year than we've had in the past.
Yeah, 15 freshmen. I mean, that's a lot of institutional, and let's face it, that was a lot of institutional knowledge that left the House.
No, that's true.
There were some open seats, but there were a lot of incumbents.
Yeah, that's very true. Now, the year that I won, though, in 2009, we had 20 people come in. Wow. And in fact, that was the year I drew number 80. And Mark Keem drew 100. So he was 100 license plate. He's never forgotten me forget that. I do remember so it was a bigger class, but that does go show you, I'm now 29 out of seniority out of 100. And that does show you over 9 years how quickly things shift. And of course, we had a big shift this year with this election, and historical numbers of women that we have in the House. Right. And so I think that's going to continue into the next this year's election federally, and also 2019 as well. And so, I think there's a lot of changes happening in Virginia, and I think we're seeing that this year. And Medicaid expansion is one of those first things that we see where people came together. And in this case, I want to give credit where credit's due with Speaker Cox allowing his caucus to vote their constituencies, because I don't think that the previous Speaker would have allowed that. And I think that's just evident by the fact that we could only muster 33, 34 votes. You saw a considerable number of Republicans crossing over, even ones that had been there last year, crossing over and voting this year, but voting no last year.
Right, and so even though, we've got almost 50 in the House and almost 20 in the Senate, the Speaker of the House, Kurt Cox, actually makes committee assignments in both chambers.
No.
No?
No, just the House.
Just to the House. So in the House, what our challenge was this year is that they were putting majority Republicans on all of the committees. Yeah. So we've had a question from Lisa in Fairfax asking whether or not it makes a difference whether people who show up to testify in the committees, and there's a lot of people up here, we're very politically active, obviously. Does it make a difference when people show up to these committee hearings if you've got committees that are stacked politically?
Well, it depends on the issue. And so if you have an issue like Medicaid expansion, well, we've been talking about this for several years, and people are just immovable. And the fact that we did see some movement, I think, was testament not just to the people coming to testify, but I think it was the years and years of negotiation and people hearing from their constituents. But there's some controversial issues like gun safety, for example. 70 bills for gun safety were introduced this year, not a single one passed. And that's because the Speaker put people on the subcommittee on the majority side that are no votes regardless of what the issue is. They didn't even care what it is. I brought a bill really based out of the headlines in Stafford County, a 4-year-old boy that went to a home daycare, found a revolver on a coffee table and shot and killed himself. And so my law was to say that if you run a home daycare, you can have to lock up all your guns.
Right, that you would think that's not really controversial.
Not controversial, you would think not controversial at all, but the bill was defeated on party line votes. And so to my point is, it depends on the issue. But the majority of the bills that we deal with are not controversial like that. They're not the ones that make the headlines. And so the number of bills that do pass are done in a bipartisan way, and that needs to be recognized. So to your question, to Lisa's question about whether it makes a difference to have people come and testify, depending on the issue, it does make a difference. It also makes a difference who the patron is too. I've noticed that over time too.
Yeah, me too.
And so you want to make sure that you do have someone that is that works well with everyone, and there's always things that do come up, and so you could sometimes have to work things out. You have to be astute and work your bills too. Some of the legislators that have the most success are the ones that will go to the committee chair and other committee members in advance and tell them about the bill before they sit down and present it. Tell them in advance and why this is so important to them.
Yeah, I know that. I'm learning the hard way because I'm trying to get a bill through about community schools. Yeah. Next year will be year 3, but I'm learning as I go along. And you're right. You have to do some advance work, and you have to talk to the chair. But you have to do that advance work in the committee, because a lot of times people think it's going to be voted on the floor, and it just never gets to the floor. Right. But there have been some successful bills this year. One of the ones that I think was signed today was Bill Stanley's bill, and that was reducing suspensions to no more than 45 days, and not suspending children under 3rd grade for more than 3 days. Which you'd think wouldn't be controversial. Right. But, so I'll give credit where that is due too, because in the Senate, some of this debate over Medicaid expansion was most heated in the Senate. Yeah, it definitely was. And speaking of the Senate, I mean, someone who was our champion was Emmett Hanger. Senator Emmett Hanger from Rappahannock area, South Side, did a terrific job in shepherding this through. And, he's always been a big supporter of Medicaid expansion, but he really did demonstrate a profile in courage, because he knew that what would happen this year would result in something getting to the governor. And so there's a tremendous amount of pressure for him to not put forward that support, and even going against his majority leader. And so he does put principle ahead of politics, and he deserves a lot of credit for doing that. Yeah, it really ended up being Republicans debating Republicans. Yeah. This was not the Democrats, because everybody already knew how the Democrats were going to vote. So it really came down to a champion in the Republican caucus, arguing the case. Right. But to your point, in the House, you said Kirk Cox allowed people to vote their constituencies. Mm-hmm. And that's the other thing about having caucuses, is that most of the time you have a caucus to keep your people together. Yeah. Yeah, so, no, that's true. And I think the real question is what's going to be the outcome of this? And, over time that we as Democrats, we brought this up, and this was a big issue for us campaigning, and you saw the results of the election. And I think a lot of Republicans saw the results of the election, and I think that allowed them to bring this bill to the floor and allow people to vote how they wanted to vote. And so that was really important. But those that have been the naysayers and continue to oppose, I do wonder how their constituents are going to react. And it may be because that it passed and it became law that they'll be fine with it. And even though that their member opposed it, they'll be benefiting from it. And once they actually have Medicaid, they'll actually use it and find a lot of relief from using the Medicaid, from using their health care. But I wonder if there'll be any backlash their constituencies will have
on their members who are still opposed to it. Because it's one of those things where when we poll Medicaid expansion, it polls 83% of people in support. So I know that 17% of people are not living in just those Republican districts.
I agree with you.
So it seems like to me that you have legislators that are in a different place than their constituents. And the question is, in 2019, will their constituents let their legislators know it?
It's going to be very interesting. Rachel Maddow did 10 minutes last week, I don't know, Wednesday, Thursday, about the passage of Medicaid, and she was actually showing some of the ads that House candidates had used last year. Wendy Gooditis was one of the things that she showed, talking in very personal terms, these candidates, about why they were invested in seeing Medicaid expansion pass. And then she interviewed Danica Roem, and Danica had a capture of last year's vote and this year's vote in the House and how dramatically different they were, right? Yeah. So to your point, it's kind of like, by the time this actually is implemented in January of 2019, that's when it goes into effect, will there really be enough time in those intervening months to when everybody, the Senate and the House, is up for election in November of 2019 to see an effect?
Well, it's a good question. I think that there will be the effect. I think people will see that, but because it's the law, they may not be angry. And so it'll be interesting to see if there's something else, if there's a gun issue, or if there's some other issue that is important to their constituents that gets them engaged in the process. So much with the election that we had in 2016 with President Trump being elected, so much of that has now woken a lot of people up. And so they're starting to become more engaged in federal and state issues. And they're starting to realize how important these things play in their lives. And so the question is now that they're paying attention, will they hold their legislators accountable? And I hope that they do. And I hope that that brings out more people to come out to vote. Because when people do vote, when they're engaged, then they get the right constituent, they get the right representation that's speaking for them.
I saw something just today that there are 4 million 18-year-olds, or there's 4 million young people turning 18 this year that are going to be eligible to vote for the first time in November. 4 million brand new voters. What do you think?
Right. Well, I mean, I tell you, I marched in the gun safety rally.
I did too. March for Our Lives, right?
Yes, and it was wonderful to see such young people engaged in this. And this is more than just a flash in the pan. This is a movement. And this, I know this is, I gave you an Arlington County statistic, but the Arlington Registrar in March put out a statistic for the months of January and February saying that the new people registered to vote, 40% were between the ages of 18 and 25. And that is at historic levels. And so people in that cohort aren't registering for no reason whatsoever. They're registering because they intend to vote. And so if that momentum keeps up, where you see people coming to vote, because if you talk to young people these days, most young people don't care whether you're LGBTQ.
Right.
They don't care if their friends are here legally or illegally, or their parents are, or they're dreamers. They're not interested in that. And the gun safety issue, they can't figure out why we haven't done anything on it. And you think about things like student debt and things like that coming out of college, real concerns that they have, and they're now starting to pay attention. And they're starting to get engaged, and now we know they're starting to register. So what we could be seeing here is a movement.
Well, I can't wait to talk to you more about that. When we come back from this break, we are going to be talking to Delegate Patrick Hope about the momentum of young people, young voters who are registering in droves. And in Arlington in particular is a millennials town. So join us after the break as we talk further about this.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. Well, it's a matches and that's no good. Yeah. Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about ripped off life. Nothing very nice on a homeless mind. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Yeah.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Why don't you just wash your car at home?
When I wash my car, everything runs down the street and down into the storm drains. With all the chemicals in the soaps and waxes, the last thing I want to do is poison my own drinking water. At least here, it's all contained and recycled on site. That's why I also take my car in for oil changes instead of doing it myself. Might take a chance on spilling stuff. You know what the best part is?
What?
More time to kick back and watch the game.
How far would you go to protect the planet?
I want you to build an ark.
Here we go. Okay, that's good. Oh, okay. Ow!
Maybe there's another way.
People, the flood is imminent. Is it too much to ask for a little precipitation?
Go to fightglobalwarming.com to find out what you and your community can do to reduce global warming pollution.
Somewhere around the world, there are men and women of the armed forces risking their lives, helping rebuild communities after natural disasters, collecting toys for needy children, tutoring kids in school. These are your sons and daughters who work to keep us safe, secure, and free. Dedicated men and women who put their country first.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. Joining me is Delegate Patrick Hope as we do a deep dive into Medicaid expansion and other issues from this past session. So when we went to our break, we were talking about Gen Z, and I give credit to Brian Kelleher for reminding me that those under 26 are Gen Z, not millennials. Politics is a numbers game, right? Kyle McDaniel was on this show not too long ago, and he quoted Haley Barbour, governor of Mississippi, saying, politics is about addition. You have to expand your base. So from a Democratic perspective, how do you feel about our opportunity to expand our base?
Well, I do think that there's plenty of opportunity to do that. We have a lot of different openings in the other parts of the state, a lot of different opportunities to educate people. I think that now that we have 49 people in office on the House, we'll have more resources to go in there and start targeting key districts. And I think that we now have a good message, and we have something on our side, I think the wind at our back, so to speak, that we have a good message. We have Medicaid expansion. We can start doing some things with the safety net that we've promised to do. We can do some things with helping women. We can help our economy. We can help working families just achieve that American dream. And so those are the things that we have to get together. We have to talk about tax reform. We have to talk about all those different things that matter to people's pocketbooks. And we want to be the party of economic and job security.
Absolutely, and I think we ran a record number of people in 2017, I believe. We had more Democrats running in more seats, even ones that had been historically and are considered reliably Republican. People ran in those races. And I think it was important and significant for people to put themselves out there. It takes a lot of time, and you raise a lot of money to run in a district where it's a long shot.
Right.
But it paid off. And so I think in 2019, when we have both the House and the Senate up, there are opportunities. And of course, I sit on the Board of Virginians list, so I'm all about electing more women to office. But next week on this show, we are going to have a young woman here from Rise to Run. Rise to Run is a brand new program that really encourages young people to run for office. And you know, I think about people like Katie Crystal, who's on the Arlington board, and she is a phenom, in my opinion. But there are young people all across the Commonwealth of Virginia with a little bit of encouragement who would be great candidates for office.
Yeah, no, and it's really important that we cultivate that base and we try to make sure they stay engaged and stay involved. And I think we'll use the same strategy that we did in 2017. In 2019, we're going to run everywhere, and we're going to run hard and make sure people have the resources that they need. And I think they're going to surprise some people. I really think that there's another wave coming.
And so Medicaid expansion will be this signature piece of historic legislation that Democratic candidates will run saying, our party passed this, I'm assuming.
I think so. Oh, absolutely, because there's a lot of people that will benefit all across the state. So when you talk about accomplishments, you bet Democrats are going to say that we've been ahead of this for years and of pushing this. But that's just part of it. That's part of this whole platform of economic and job security, because this will help on all angles, but we've got to do a lot more for families.
I agree with you, and I'm always talking about things like paid leave and universal pre-K, and we don't have full-day kindergarten everywhere. You were talking about the gun incident in the child care home. I have been working with so many organizations trying to do something about oversight, licensing, and regulation of daycare in the Commonwealth of Virginia, which is very weak. I kind of look at all of this as issues that support working families. There's people either taking care of children, or if they don't have children, they're taking care of aging parents. Yeah. And we don't have policies either at the federal level or at the state level that really supports people who are trying to create a stable home for their family, but also stable homes and stable families create stable communities.
Yes. No, it's a very pro-family platform, and I think it's one you're going to see a lot more of from our candidates across the Commonwealth.
So if you were to give us what you think are going to be your top objectives for, and maybe some of the things didn't happen in 2018, what do you think that you're going to try to raise up the visibility of in 2019?
Well, I think if you look at Medicaid expansion, we do have to come back and look at that provider assessment to make sure physicians do have that increase so that they can see more patients. The other thing, you'll see a continued prop-up of opioid crisis that doesn't seem to be going away. Maybe we've had fewer prescriptions for opioids, but they're finding other ways like heroin and fentanyl to feed their addiction. And so there's some things that we need to do. And I actually think that there might be some parallels between our mental health system and our substance abuse system, because when someone presents to the emergency room, and we've done a really good job for those that overdose to make sure they have naloxone, right, that the different people have it so that they can provide it right away to reverse the impact of an overdose. But what ends up happening is they go to the emergency room and they come back and they're shooting up again and they're coming back. And so maybe we need to think about, when someone is in mental health crisis, how we put them in a temporary detention order for 72 hours or so for evaluation. What if we did something similar for certain people that meet certain criteria that are overdosing, and we allow them to detox and put them in an environment where they can get treatment? And so we need to think about a little bit differently about our services, and I almost think that we need to create a parallel commission to the Deeds Commission on opioid addiction to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure that those services and treatments are available for substance abuse users.
Oh, I agree with you, and I think there's a lot of overlap there, and you're absolutely right. Having worked with organizations that deal with both things, when you put people back into the situation that they left without support, without supporting them, you're setting them up to fail again. And this is so true, that's true of reentry programs, and that's something we haven't really talked about, is how all of these things affect what's going on in our jails and prisons around the Commonwealth of Virginia. But I work with Friends of Guest House. It's a reentry program for women in Alexandria, but at 26 spots, they are the largest reentry program for women in the whole Commonwealth of Virginia, and they've got 26 spots. And meanwhile, incarceration of women has gone up something like 700% in the last 30 years. So for people to be successfully transitioned back, whether it's from addiction, mental health issues, or incarceration, it seems like we are lacking resources, systems, supporting organizations that are doing the work. I think public-private partnerships are something where we really have to put some more resources.
Yeah, no, I agree. And you can't overstate the significance of Medicaid expansion, because this is going to give us the platform to put those services in place to make sure that everyone has access to it. No matter your age or your income or your zip code, you're going to have access to some service, whether it's through your private pay, maybe you have it through, if you're a senior citizen, through Medicare, but those who are at the lower end of the payment scale, they'll now have access through Medicaid, and making sure that we have those support services in place. That's where our focus needs to be.
Yeah, and and I know that because there's all these caveats about who's exempted, or how you can be in a training program, or you can be seeking employment and get the benefits, because just looking at people who are in reentry programs, they're getting counseling and they're in supported housing and they are going through job training. Are these some of the people that would be eligible for Medicaid expansion?
Yes, they would be exempted. So some people that are in those types of programs, mentally ill, substance abusers, they would be, maybe they're taking care of a parent or something like that, or a child, they would be exempted from it. So there's a lot of exemptions in here. I don't want people to focus too much on the work requirement, because there will be some people who will not be eligible because they don't meet the work requirement, but it's not going to be a large number. In fact, I think it's going to be a very small number that are not going to fit that category. And so the vast majority of people are going to be fit squarely into the expansion and eligible.
So having freed up this money, I know that a lot of people are talking about, oh, now we've got more money, because money's coming in for healthcare and healthcare programs. We can take money that had been dedicated to that and we can put it toward things like teacher salary increases. Right. What are some of the other things? Fully filling all of the judgeships. What are some of the other things I've heard about recently?
Well, these are some of the exciting things that we have to do with this Medicaid expansion budget, because we were spending money on things that now the federal government is paying for. And so that frees up a lot of dollars to do other things. So we're giving a 3% pay raise to teachers, which is badly needed throughout the state. We're still underfund our teachers, and we need to do a better job of doing that. But this is a good step in the right direction. A 2% pay raise for state employees, very important. And to your point about state judgeships, this is something we haven't done before, and we've identified even 30 more vacancies that we're going to fund next year, and that we already have it in the 2-year biennium budget. It's in that second year, 30 additional judges that were reserved, that we need more vacancies to be filled, and so we're creating 30 new judgeships.
I think that's very exciting, also because we don't elect judges in Virginia. And having worked with Justin Fairfax 2 or 3 years ago on diversity in our judicial system, of which there has not been a lot.
No, it's not.
Each county, I believe, decides who will be appointed to these judgeships. Could you just spend a couple of minutes explaining how it works in Virginia?
Yeah.
Who will be the people filling these judgeships?
Yeah, no, it's interesting because each delegation decides who they're going to choose. And I run the Arlington delegation selection. And so when we have a vacancy, we get all the delegation together and we interview the candidates that are interested, and we as a delegation choose who we think is the best person. And of course, whoever we choose, that's the unanimous choice. And so we take that to the courts committee, and that's the individual that gets interviewed, and that's the individual who becomes the new judge.
So that does give some weight to intentionally trying to diversify, as was Justin Fairfax's goal several years ago, to focus on the fact that women and people who are reflective of their communities should be sitting in courtrooms.
That's right. No, that's exactly right. And it's something that we all think about and we all talk about, making sure that we have that diversity, that diverse of opinions, different areas of opinion that comes in, and making sure we do that. And I'm very pleased it's almost a 50-50 ratio in Arlington for male to female on the bench.
Good job. Well, I think very exciting things are happening in Virginia. The fact that we have more people will have access to health care, but we have more dollars for teachers and state employees and for these other programs, more judges, is really kind of exciting for Virginia. And I wanted you on this show really so that people fully understood this is something to celebrate. It's historic in its own right, but there's just so many reasons to be optimistic about going forward what we are going to do with these resources.
It really is a historic achievement, and the central linchpin is the Medicaid expansion, because it frees up new revenue to invest into our safety net. And that is something that many of us have been fighting for a number of years. And so I'm just pleased to vote for a budget like this, because I really think that this is a budget that the voters asked us to vote for in 2017 election.
And so I'm just waiting, I'm sure you are too, to figure out when the bill signing is going to be. I'm sure Governor Northam is probably trying to determine the right tableau for a ceremonial bill signing.
He wants to make sure that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. That's what he told me today, but he believes it will be this week.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being on here, Delegate Patrick Hope. I know that the medical field and healthcare is something that you have worked in for many years professionally. It's great to have you on the show to share with us why we should be paying attention to this. And I hope that we'll have you back again sometime soon, maybe to talk about what bills that you're going to raise up in 2019. Thank you so much at home for being with us here on Inside Scoop. It is a great day in Virginia. Medicaid expansion is going to benefit so many Virginians in so many ways. And I hope you take an interest and stay engaged with how Virginia is serving its citizens.